did you find a lot of benefit from like reaching out? I know that you like, I've heard you talk about reaching out to admissions or like specific people in schools. Like, was that really beneficial for you?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I absolutely made Zoom meetings, and I think it was great. And also, goodbye to anyone leaving. Thank you for staying in. But I met with specifically like 4 schools and their college reps. I attended their open houses. Usually on the law school website, they'll have like a recruitment event calendar that you can sign up for Zoom calls. I think traditionally you were physically going to the campus, so it's kind of nice right now that schools are really set up for you to access them beforehand. And I do recommend going to as many as possible. Number one, even if you don't have a great amount of time to make one-on-one calls, it helps you get a feel for how the admissions counselors really communicate with students, because I could tell the counselors that they didn't have any one-on-one connections with applicants, and some counselors did. And so I kind of thought that was interesting. But specifically right now, I'm, and in complete transparency, I'm focusing on 2 law schools. I have a significant financial aid offer from one, but I was waitlisted for another school. And the school that I was waitlisted at, I formed a great professional relationship with one of their high-ranking college admissions officers. And he actually sent me an email before I got my acceptance or waitlist notification. So I didn't even know how my status was, but I got that email a week or so before, letting me know that they plan, in the email, he said that they plan to take students off the waitlist line this year, as they have in the past, and they plan for it to be similar to previous years. And so I thought that was very significant, number one, because I did not even know my status at that point, pretty much outlined the fact that I was waitlisted, but also that I took it as there's a chance I'll be taken off the waitlist. And so that bond would not have formed if I didn't come to their open house. I would say I attended about 4 of their other events, and then just emailed every few months or so. You don't need to bug them every few days or every other week, but I would say like 3.5 or like every month, I kind of just checked in and asked if there's any new current students that are reaching out to prospective students, which would be myself. And so I definitely found that to be beneficial. When I was studying for the LSAT, however, I wasn't as active until I took my first LSAT. And that's when LSAC hosts their, it's like their law school admissions events, and it's on their website. I recommend signing up for those because you can meet multiple schools in one day, and it saves you time, and it saved me stress from straying away from my focus at the LSAT, but also just committing myself to the application process. So I absolutely recommend. And then Solomon asks, how far in advance did you reach out to your recommenders? Also, how far in advance? The first time that I reached out, that I emailed to them, I would say I gave them number one, I gave them a deadline that was 1.5 months in advance of the deadline that I actually wanted, if that makes sense. So they thought, because there was, I'm trying to think of, I submitted my applications in actually January, but I thought I was submitting them in October. And so the deadline that I gave them was the beginning of September. And so I recommend reaching out to your recommenders as soon as possible. And I think that really puts an umbrella over like months in advance or like weeks in advance. Like just do it as soon as possible that you can. Make sure that it's a formal greeting and that you're comfortable submitting that. But I would just recommend giving them as much time, because the sooner that they give it to you, the sooner you can just submit it on your student portal in your LSAC account, and the sooner you don't have to worry about it. because there was one professor that I asked for a letter of recommendation from, and I also asked for specific letters of recommendations to specific schools. Like I applied to one school in California that I was really focused on, and I had specific letters. I had a specific personal statement, and one of those letters was only given to me a week before my actual deadline because it was so late from the professor. And so I recommend, number one, reaching to them at least a few months in advance, because right now everyone's transitioning, they're grading finals, and they're going to be heading into the summer. But once you reach the end of the summer, I know professors or employers maybe are really preparing for the fall, and so they get busier.
I was offered an X amount from some school, and then another amount from a lesser, I wouldn't say ranked school, and I basically forced them to give me more, because at the end of the day, it's just, if I can get my undergrad paid for to like 100%, even like 98%, I'm good. I don't care where I go. But I really had to nickel and dime everything. I'm just thinking like that type of hard negotiation is probably not going to work in law school. Is it all just dependent on your numbers? I had decent numbers, like track wise, but it's just how much leverage you have, I guess, going into this.
Well, I'd love for you to elaborate when you say that you forced them. So if you forced them to essentially pay for the entire thing, I'm curious about that. You also mentioned that it was an athletic scholarship. So I assume that
basically,
yeah,
I'm going to go to your rival, and if you don't give me this, I'll go to your rival and beat you.
Okay.
And
okay. So there was an athletic factor here. Is this referring to the running that you did, the track?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean,
interesting.
At the end of the day, it's probably too harsh to even think of that scenario towards law school. But I think, I don't know, you're looking into this perspective in what rankings, just from the U.S. whatever rankings.
Yeah. So the U.S. News Law School rankings, which are so important to law school admission officers and a lot of other people too, that is a rough equivalent there. So of course, athletics aren't really a factor in law school, but you could help their competition. So by raising their competition status in the rankings, obviously, one admitted student with a high GPA and LSAT will not make or break a school's rankings, most likely, but every little bit matters. So if you're significantly above them in the rankings, then in their medians, then it'll help the school if you choose them. It'll hurt them if you choose a competitor of theirs. So I think that's where it comes back to applying to multiple schools that are in the same region or that are roughly comparable to each other in some way. And then you play off offers against each other to some extent. But having the strongest numbers is going to be what makes the difference.
Yeah. So it's not entirely based off numbers, but it's a high majority is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a whole lot else. So there's no athletic equivalent, of course. It's going to be LSAT,
I wish.
GPA. Yeah. Yes, it's going to be LSAT, GPA, the other factors as well, the personal statement, optional essays, diversity statement, letters of rec, and all of that, making the strongest application possible. And also making sure you develop those relationships. So having multiple points of contact, multiple interactions with them, expressing interest before, during, and after you apply, getting to know them, setting up Zoom, quote unquote, informational interviews, establish connection. Of course, it's hard to do this for 10, 20 schools, although I imagine if you're incredibly organized and you have trackers and a spreadsheet and such, you could theoretically establish relationships with every school you apply to and have Zoom calls with all of them. They don't offer interviews by default. You have to ask for them. But this is one of those things where if they like you enough, that could make the difference in certain cases where the numbers don't do it for you.
I do want to talk about how I can incorporate unique skills or I guess pieces of information that I know that could be useful to the admissions council, and figure out a way to highlight that in an application, whether it be in a personal statement, a diversity statement, or just like maybe even on like the law school resume. Like I know that those, you can probably format those to maybe highlight something that isn't normally on there. So yeah, no, I'm just looking for feedback on maybe if somebody has any advice on like what you would do to incorporate like a unique skill or like a unique education that you have that maybe isn't common to like a law school app.
Can you give some more specific examples, Jack? Because I feel like what you've asked is so general. It's hard to really get a handle on it. What exactly is going on for you?
Well, I mean, Steve, you and I were talking about, we were talking about crypto and Bitcoin before, because I was considering taking a course on it. And I also have some other I come from like a neurobiology background. So like I have like a sciencey education. So trying to figure out a way to highlight that or highlight things that I'm interested in or have like knowledge on in an application that's generally used for, other purposes, I guess you could say. So I guess just like any kind of advice that people might have about how to incorporate that if I don't want to throw it in my personal statement or, I'm just curious to hear people's perspectives on that.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll get into some details with the examples at some point over the course of this conversation. Chris said he's an engineer and has a bit. Chris, you want to share more on that?
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so my first essay I wrote was I'm a civil engineer, but also I've worked as a petroleum engineer, and so my first essay I wrote was on. It was so embarrassing I don't even want to say it. I mean, okay, I'll say it because I don't embarrass easily, but it was on jujitsu, like because I'm really into training jujitsu, and so I threw that one out, and now I'm writing about my career, even though. I've read a lot of articles that say don't write about your resume if we don't want you to restate your resume. But for me, I just because I'm a white male, so I haven't dealt with like systematic oppression or anything like that I can write about, or like any difficulties that have been placed on me due to society or anything like that. So I've just kind of had to find. And I think that it's good to write about like a difficulty you overcame or that you've dealt with. Personally, that's why I've gathered through reading articles and stuff and talking to people. So I wrote about the struggles I've had in my career because I graduated with a petroleum engineering major and had a really tough time finding a job. And then I had to pivot and then find out how I could become a civil engineer. And then I had to like do a bunch of stuff. And anyways, it was a pain in the ass, but like anything like that, that's a pain in the ass that you overcome came like that. You should write about that, or something that's not ideal,
It's a great point, Chris. Yeah, I mean, writing about struggles, writing about adversity, regardless of personal immutable characteristics, I think can be valuable because it shows that you've been through something difficult. You've had some sort of transformative experience. You've come out the other side and learned a valuable lesson.
Like a difficult project or something that you used, or it's difficult project in school or work that you use, the scientific method or something you learn in school to do, that you applied your skills doing.
Yeah, that's definitely one major category of essay topics I think can be valuable to include. Solomon, I saw you raised your hand, please.
Yeah, so I had 2 points. I was gonna ask Jack, do you know what type of law you're trying to practice in particular?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot from whenever people hear that I'm a science major going into law. They're always like, oh, you should go into like copyright law, or oh, you should go into like patent law or whatever. And I'm always like, yeah, it's not really what I want to go into. Like the area of law, I'm kind of more interested in I'm in public interest law. Like I'm thinking either public interest law or like civil rights.
Okay, perfect.
So, no, go sorry.
Ahead. No, go ahead. Perfect. Go ahead.
But I saw like there's no connection really between like, I mean, at least there's no apparent connection between what I want to pursue and like an area or what I want to pursue in like my background. So it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So first of all, let me caveat by saying I haven't thoroughly completed my personal statement yet, but I attended a law conference I think last week or 2 weeks ago, and spoke to a mission counselor, and I think something like this kind of came up I can't remember what the exact topic was, but it was very similar to your question in particular. So what I would do if I were you, for example, you talked about how you came from a neurobiology or science background. So I'll kind of use that to say how that makes a unique perspective. So you just talked right now about public interest. So you can talk about how you want to change maybe hospitals or people who are dying and maybe change public policy around that area in particular, and how your unique perspective, having a neurobiology background, understanding and seeing how maybe doctors who maybe didn't have a good understanding of ways to change public policy or maybe informing their clients as they're coming in, things like that. So that's how I would kind of approach it, kind of saying how your unique perspective as a neurobiologist can fit into that public interest or civil service role. And one thing that just came to mind, like I said, is hospitals or our healthcare system. So that's one idea. But like I said, take my advice with a grain of salt or caveat. Like I said, I haven't started myself, but that was kind of a question that came up. And that's how I remember one of the admission counselors sort of depositing it. So yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Ben, I saw you asked in the chat about the guest interview last Sunday. Were there any insights or takeaways you got from that you think could apply to Jack's question?
I'd be reluctant to try to paraphrase it, but if it's archived somewhere, I just found it immensely helpful. Like I have some like screenshots of some of the notes that he had, but like just how he talked a lot about integrating your personal statement with your diversity statement and kind of like planting seeds in one that kind of leads to the other, not like overlap, not like writing about the same thing, but kind of like using them to like strengthen each other. And so, it's like in your personal statement or diversity statement, you can focus more on like the neuroscience background, and the personal statement, maybe like reference it, but like, I don't know. I don't explain this well he did, but it made a lot of sense whenever he was talking about it.
Yeah, of course, for sure. That was one of the TA guest interviews that's for the LSAT Unplugged public YouTube channel and podcast. So I'll throw the link in the chat in a little bit for those who were curious about that. It was a UC Berkeley Law School grad turned admission consultant who definitely had some valuable tips. He's a great speaker. But I love the idea of like basically taking the what's the word, like the seeds of one personal statement. So there could be some quick references to a certain theme or topic in there that are not fully fleshed out there, but kind of a nod to it. And then the diversity statement could go deeper on that specific area. So there shouldn't be total repetition between the two. You don't want to essentially say the same things twice, but there can be slight thematic overlap between the two statements. And of course, STEM, crypto actually can relate a lot to civil rights and can relate a lot to activism as well. I mean, the possibilities that cryptocurrency and blockchain technology open up to allow people to access transactions outside of the mainstream banking system. That's a pretty unique application right there. I mean, for those who have no clue what I'm talking about, just look up the phrase smart contracts. I'll type in the chat, literally smart contracts, where technology essentially can enforce the contract outside of the legal system specifically. I think Jack's initial question was in response to a post I made on social media about how you can reference cryptocurrency in your law school application, and admission officers who've simply heard about it but have no idea what it is will be impressed. And the point is not to say that everybody should immediately aim to talk about this in their personal statement specifically, but rather that you can demonstrate that you're on the cutting edge, and they'll respect that because so many law students and lawyers are not. And those who are on the cutting edge, specifically in anything tech related, are going to have an advantage when it comes to getting employment post-graduation. And law schools very much want you to be employable, but many law grads have nothing distinguishing to offer on the job market. So if you do understand something about tech, you're at a unique advantage there. So I've put a link in the chat for those who are just a little bit curious about this and want a very simple as possible, at least, explanation on this.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say, like, I really like that point that Ben made about really having like the seeds of one, like of your diversity statement, like complement the other one. I think that's good. The only thing that I'm struggling with is because I don't know. I kind of had already rough ideas for both my diversity statement and personal statement that I kind of like already, and so I have all these other things that I want to mention in my application, and so I'm leaning towards like finding a unique way to throw them in like my resume maybe, or like throwing them into maybe as like a small portion of one of them, but I'm still working those out. So but yeah, no, I like Steve said, I'm very interested in crypto, and I'm going to be taking a class on it. So I was like trying to figure out a way to like incorporate that into it.
Nice. And I mean, you really don't need to rewrite any of your essays. This could be yet another essay. So it doesn't have to displace the ones you've already drafted. It could be one simply in addition. It could be an optional essay. But I would encourage you, definitely, please make sure to submit your drafts, Jack, as well as anyone else, for the application essay workshop that Alyssa has coming up on Wednesday. And Alyssa Nayaku will be doing future ones as well. And then the whole class can give you feedback on your draft. Kevin?
Yeah, hey everyone. Just kind of a thought that I had. This was sort of how I haven't done my personal statement yet, but I've been thinking through kind of similarly, because I have a background in music and opera that's kind of random to law. But when I was writing my diversity statement, what really helped me was that I focused on a quality about myself that I felt was applicable to law, and then I used the topic of sexual orientation to discuss that. But I didn't approach it thinking of that as the topic, and I think that worked for me. I'm going to apply the same mindset to my personal statement. I don't want it to be about like my music background. I want it to be about my work ethic and how it allows me to rise to challenges. The examples I'm going to give are going to be very, music related, because I think it'll help kind of help me stick out, as well as that's my experience that I have to write about. So I don't know if that resonates with anyone else, but I definitely have, it's really helped me to think about the specific topic as kind of just like a support or example, but not the theme of an essay. Then one other thing that I would just add is, you don't have to make the essay. Let's say you're going to write about the cryptocurrency thing. You don't have to just think of it as an essay about cryptocurrency. I think it could be, the theme of the essay could be the process that, the internal process or mindset that you went through to start studying cryptocurrency, and like showing the fact that you're someone who is willing to totally dive in and study something that you know nothing about, but and like talking through the mindset of what made you do that, I think could be really applicable to law. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts like that.
That's a fantastic.
Does that make sense?
That's I mean, that resonates with me a lot. I mean, it kind of, what I'm getting out of that, what you said, Kevin, is that the topic is not the topic. Just like in LSAT questions, It's not really about the surface level topic. There's an underlying structure. There's an underlying theme. There's an underlying point. So the point of writing an essay, like I said, I referenced cryptocurrency and blockchain, maybe somewhat provocatively because it was for social media, but the point there was not about those words, those key buzzwords in particular. The point was, are you the kind of person who is up to date on things? Are you on the cutting edge? If you are, law schools will appreciate that. You certainly don't have to be about that. There are people who don't care at all about tech, and that's fine. You can still get into law school and do fantastically well and have a great career not being a tech person. I'm personally not a tech person, and it's okay. But if you are, emphasize that. Make sure they know. And if you're into something else, make that your theme, and you can have an example to illustrate that. But the hook that you use doesn't have to be the point of the essay. The hook can simply be a hook, but rather to indicate something personal about yourself, like, I'm the kind of person who something excites me, I go all in on it and study it deeply and aim to get it from every angle. And I'll take classes on it and listen to podcasts and watch videos and read books and take courses to learn everything I possibly can. It could also be, as Bennett put in the chat, like music school, rigorous practice. That is also the kind of thing you can highlight. And of course, rigorous practice, being willing to put in several hours a day and understand it thoroughly. Also, of course, it's something you're going to do in law school as well. Totally different topic, but you will still devote that time, and you have to be the kind of person who's willing to devote that time. Is what I'm saying kind of capturing what you were talking about, Kevin?
Exactly. The topic is not the topic. I'm writing that down because that totally, much more eloquently says what I was trying to say. You know, the topic is not the topic. The topic is you and the qualities that you possess that other people might not, that your resume is not going to tell them. So yeah, I think thinking about like the motivations behind why you made certain choices and decisions says a lot more about you than an interest that you have. While of course name dropping any possible interest that might help distinguish you.
Yeah, well, I'd say definitely. I mean, pick one thing and pick it deliberately. So back to Chris's point, like people say, don't recap your entire resume. I mean, Chris seemed to disagree with that. I actually think it's true. You don't want to recap your entire resume, but you can deliberately pick one specific thing from your resume and go deep on it. Obviously, you can't capture your entire life story in 2 double-spaced pages, nor should you try. So rather than a survey or a chronology of everything, just pick one thing, go deep on it, and do so deliberately to emphasize a certain point or characteristic about yourself.
Steve, I have one more thing to add on that topic, actually. I had watched, I think in one of these classes, actually, I heard someone talk about, don't rewrite your resume. But I had such a hard time like getting over that. And so sort of just as an exercise, I basically did type out like a narrative of my resume, like kind of my whole life, my undergrad, my master's, my work experience. I just typed it out and why like I went from each decision to the next. And while I don't plan on submitting it to any part of a personal statement, and it's, way longer than it needs to be and everything, the exercise made it so much more clear to me which one of these things my personal statement needs to cover. Like it all of a sudden jumped out at me where I was totally struggling with it. So for anyone who has the time, I just, I'm not saying you should type out your whole resume as a narrative, but don't be afraid to take the time to like write a couple essays that you're not going to use, because even if you don't include it with your application, it can help you just have your motivation to get through this whole process. And just in conversations talking about people, it really helps to be able to quickly just, have an elevator pitch of what you've done and where you want to go.
No, very extremely valuable exercise. I did something similar a couple of years ago, and it still sticks in my mind just because it's so rare, for me at least, to take those moments for self-reflection deliberately, to journal or get something down. And you never know what it can bring up, and what it could bring up that could be the seed of a fantastic personal statement, much better than what you might have written had you not taken the time for the self-reflection. But yeah, as Chris says, it can be a painful task. It's not always going to be fun, but I think it can be meaningful. Yeah, that's a great piece of advice.